Welcome to Life Sciences in Black and White with me, S.J. Slowell. For today's lesson, we'll be looking at the transition from African apes or early humans to modern humans in terms of a transition between the structural features of the skull. So we'll be looking at the changes from African apes to Homo species. One, the label there is talking about the cranial ridge and the brow ridge. So the cranial ridge in African apes, we say that it is less Welcome to Life Sciences in Black and White with me, S.J. Slowell. Today we'll be looking at the transition from African apes to Homo species. So we'll be looking at the structural features in terms of the skull, how they transitioned from African ape to Homo species. So number one, there we'll be looking at the cranial and then the brow ridges. And as you can see from the diagram, the cranial ridges and the brow ridges are more developed in an African ape. And then in a human, they are less developed. Then as you go down to number two, we can see we're talking about the cranium. Then the cranium in an African ape is smaller, so which means it will house a smaller brain. And then in a human, we can see that we have a larger cranium, which means it will house a larger brain. Then number three, the face, because it has more developed cranial ridges and brow ridges, it will be sloping. So we say the face is sloping. And then in a human, number three, as you can see, because the brow ridges and the cranial ridges are less developed, it means it will have a flat face. And then we go to number four, we look at the dentition. You can see that they have large canines consume raw food. And then number four, in humans we have smaller canines because we prepare our food. We can also talk about the palate here. The palate here is U-shaped, and then in a human, the palate, we said it is round shaped. Then we can also mention the large canines will cause the jaw to have spaces so that the jaw is able to close, which means there will be diastema, which is the spaces between the teeth, and then in humans, no diastema. Then we can go to number five. Number five is telling us that the African ape has a larger jaw, and then humans have a smaller jaw. Also, we can see that number five is also telling us that African apes have a less developed chin, and then humans have a more developed chin. Okay, so that can also be number six also. So number six is the jaw size. We can also say that about the jaw size. Number seven is telling us about the foramen magnum. So the foramen magnum in an African ape is found at the back of the skull, and then in a human it is centrally below the skull. Now let's look at the significance of all of the features we've mentioned. So we start with the cranial ridges. So the cranial ridges and brow ridges tell us about the type of food they consume, because cranial ridges are actually attachment points for muscles. So which means if they are more developed, you're able to attach more muscles. And then if you're able to attach more muscles, it makes sense because they need to correlate with a larger jaw. In order to control that larger jaw, you will need more muscles. In a human, they're less developed, so which means less muscles will be attached, and it makes sense because you're controlling a smaller jaw. Then we go to the cranium. We said the cranium is smaller, so it's smaller because it houses a smaller brain. And then the cranium in a human is larger because it houses a larger brain. And then having a larger brain, like we said, will help with language. At the same time, it will help with the use of tools. And then it will help make use of fire, which you need to prepare the cooked food. Then, because it has more developed cranial ridges and then it has a larger jaw, so the face will be sloping, or it will be what we call prognathous. Then in a human, because the cranial ridges and the brow ridges are less developed and the jaw is smaller, so it will be non-prognathous. Then, when we look at other features, we can look at the teeth. The reason why they have large canines is because they consume raw food. And because we have smaller canines, it's because we consume cooked food, which is brought upon by our use of fire. And then we talked about the palate in the last video. We said having a U-shaped palate versus a round-shaped palate. A round-shaped palate will help with language skills. And then the reason for having a diastema is because we have large canines, so therefore you must have spaces between the teeth. And then since we have small canines, there will be no diastema because you do not need the spaces between the teeth. And then lastly, the foramen magnum is at the back of the skull so that the spine can be C-shaped, which has to do with quadrupedalism. And then for a human, we say it's central below the skull so that the spine can exit vertically and then it becomes S-shaped, and then we will make sure that it is bipedal.